This program is proudly brought to you by Capital Life Insurance, the Pacific's insurer, and PNG Tourism Promotion Authority.
There was a third force that involved in the fighting in the Kokoda, and also later on at the Battle of Wau and after that. And that force was not the Australians, not the Japanese, not the Americans, but was the jungle.
Let's begin to tell our story of the war. We know the Australian stories, we know the American stories, we know the Japanese stories because they are captured there in military documents, in archival documents in their countries by the governments. But we don't know the Papua New Guinean stories.
came to our country, Papua New Guinea, our grandfathers, our forefathers, never knew what was war. When my grandfather told me about the war when I was a little boy growing up, he said they were caught by surprise when the first bombing and landing took place down in the coast. And they just saw like the Japanese and the Australians around, but they didn't know what was really happening, who was fighting who was right and who was wrong. They never know. When civilization did not come through to Papua New Guinea, our ancestors were hunters and gatherers. They were warriors. So on the southern part of the trek, where mainly the quarries come from, and the northern part of the trek is where the Orokaivans come from. They were very hostile in that time because they were hunters and gatherers. They did not have a steady place to live. They go hunting and gathering wherever they find a good spot to sleep. That's where they spend the night, and then they continue hunting. And that is how they discovered land boundaries and territories they gained. So, for example, if one of the hunters go across and he goes and discover a territory and he hunts there, then no one has to come around there. Because if you come around, you have to hunt in your own territory. You don't have to cross boundaries.
The Australian approach was to recruit people from villages, men mainly from villages, make them work on plantations, copra, rubber, a bit of coffee, tea at that stage. But most of the time there wasn't really a lot of travel around what we now know as Papua New Guinea. The war changed that. Often they wouldn't be with people from the same village. They wouldn't even be with people from the same district. They would be with people from other parts of Papua New Guinea.
When you look back to the pictures that were taken during the war, you would see the faces of people that are different. And their hairs, they will look different. The Fadjiwazis down from the village look a bit different from the ones that were up in the mountains. There were also some carriers that were recruited down in the Solomons and out in the New Guinea Islands, and they were brought in by ships. So there were a mixture of Fadjiwazis who took part in the war.
The relationship between Australians and Papua New Guineans became very strong after the war. The whole range of duties that Papua New Guineans provided to the Australians. So there was and remains a deep sense of debt that Australians have, and indeed Americans have, but Australians, I guess, in particular, because of their longer relationship here.
On the ground, Papua New Guineans, I would like to say that they contributed, apart from just being porters or carriers, they were soldiers, and they helped the Australians fight the battle and push back the Japanese. You must remember that the Japanese came within visible sight of the Port Moresby city lights when they were standing at Imita Ridge. PIB, NGIB, they played a crucial role in helping the Australians fight the Kokora campaign and win the war. And we must not forget this. Papua New Guineans were not just carriers, they were also soldiers. The green shadow was actually a term that was derived from a Japanese soldier's diary, and it was written in Japanese and interpreted into this term, green shadows. The Japanese soldier was describing the Papua New Guinean soldiers' ability to fight jungle warfare, because that's basically what the Kokoda campaign was along the Kokoda track. It was jungle warfare. And Papua New Guineans, even though they came from different areas, different parts of Papua New Guinea, they knew how to move seamlessly through the jungle.
The Japanese did not have any idea of how the track and the terrain was and how thick the jungle was and how far it was to reach from Kokoda to Port Moresby. But they were just sent here in a mission that they were sent by the emperor, and they had to do what the emperor told them. So they had no proper mapping for the trek. But it was just like a suicide mission to just get in here, and how they make the road, that's their business, but they have to carry out what the emperor said.
When you can look at front below me, you can look at the remain of the Japanese army long 1942 war. What you can look at the hand grenade left by the Japanese. When you can look at a cell long motor bomb where you see long the mountain gun. When you can look at here, that's the remain of the Japanese helmet. So Japanese use this part of the area as a defensive position along targeting Australian advanced troop coming up from Yora.
Choices were always complex about where loyalty should lie. There were people who would say, well, we need to stay with the former colonial, perhaps the continuing colonial authorities, and of course the Australians made major efforts to persuade people and convince people that this is just a temporary change. We will be back. The former Australian administrators had really powerful weapons, and I don't just mean weapons of war, but they had the weapons of administrative control, of a kind of a peace. So there were good reasons for people to make a choice and say, we will stay with the Australians even though currently we have been occupied by Japanese forces. But on the other hand, there were also good reasons for people to say, the Japanese are now our new colonial masters, we will do what they tell us, because of course if we don't, we are likely to be punished in some terrible ways, including execution.
I think our oral histories also show that there were different levels of treatments by the different ranking Japanese soldiers. So you'd find that the foot soldiers, the ordinary infantry soldiers, Japanese soldiers, were probably more aggressive than the higher ranking Japanese soldiers who were more diplomatic. So there are different levels of treatment by the Japanese. They weren't all bad. I mean, we hear horrible things, but they weren't all bad.
There was a lot of help put in by our grandfathers, our forefathers. Only very few are recognized, and like the famous Raphael Mbari. And all this time, I always think that maybe it's because of that photograph that was taken that made the Australians see how helpful and how our forefathers helped them out during the war. But if that photograph was not taken, then I don't think they will recognize our WUZZYs, because at this point of time up until now after the war, there's still some who are unknown, and they did pass away, and their stories remain with us. They told us actually what they did, how far they went, which area in the country did they help out with the Australians, but the story was not told out, and they are not known.
Fuzzy Angel term was first coined by an Australian soldier called Bert Barros, who wrote a poem, and it was published in the Australian Women's Weekly, I think in October. He described the labour, the sacrifice, the love that the carriers showed during the Kokoda campaign, and that's where he called this term the Fuzzy Angel, and it caught on. If we come back to the basic experience of these poor young men who were plucked out of their world and were made to do this work for the Allies, for the Australians on the Kokoda campaign, it's really hard to comprehend just how much they had to do, and the fact that they did it uncomplainingly and they did it with such devotion, it's just daunting. The use of supernatural means to either safeguard or protect the lives of the Australian soldiers or the Papuan soldiers was widespread, and the belief in supernatural means. I don't necessarily want to use the word sorcery, because that was perhaps, sorcery now has a particular understanding that wasn't perhaps the same in those days, but there was a wide range of magic that might have been employed to ward off bullets, to mean that the bullet that might have been fired by an Allied soldier, a Papuan or an Australian or an American soldier, would hit its target, but at the same time a bullet that was fired from a Japanese weapon would miss. This was very, very common.
If you look at the reality today, along the track, what's happening, it's just the same that our grandfathers did. We are doing the same thing all over again, but it's in a different perspective. We are now carrying packs, we are now carrying food supplies in the packs, and we are wearing decent clothing and proper trekking gears, where we have boots and all this. But if you look at the type of job that we do, it's just what our ancestors did. We are repeating the same old thing again. If you come out here, it's sort of a mind getaway thing, and you get away from your office and your computer, your mobile phone, and the same old stuff that you do back at home. And out here, you just refresh yourself, and it's all you alone.
The track that many people walk now is not necessarily the same track in every metre that was used during the war. This is not a road. This is not something that is carved out and is paved and has cement and is very difficult to change. Landslides, rain, regrowth of forest means that whole bends of the track just get neglected. But there are still some iconic parts of the Kokoda track that of course haven't changed, and I mean the most obvious one I guess would be the Golden Staircase, which for many trekkers it's their first real moment when they think, oh my gosh, why am I doing this?
When I'm on the trek, and when I see that my clients are struggling in front, climbing up or climbing down, even mainly those ones who are struggling and cannot walk, they have sore knees or they are a bit sick and they're not enjoying the walk. That is when I come in to just play music and keep them entertained and make them get their focus back on the trek. So I climb up behind them just to boost their morale up and make them feel happy while walking. It's my voice singing and it's my hands playing, but my eyes watch where I'm putting my foot. Some areas in Papua New Guinea that still exercise traditional beliefs and believe in spirits, and there's still some areas which are forbidden, they are untouched, and people are not allowed to go into such places that we believe in. But foreigners coming in and people from other places coming in, they don't know, and we don't tell them.
Devi liki kavala ki Devi moleke tisove. La boni nei enua la fara. 1926 la fara. Waliu bomu buto ni baba to tere ro ni babu ko tere be abu ale ba. No tere no bli ko to dia pa nya bli no habe ni habe. Ini ko tere mo abu agu per ni man ta ke ni babu hol su ko dia ba ni babu ke. Be ni na nu na kale ri to na le ge na ka. Ni na nu na ka ka. Ni na nu ka le ale ko ri ri to na u ele ge na ai du ri ka pro maleti. No le ga lo vi no le abuna vani mo ko gude ito gutu mo ko good evening. Il pericoli 9 minuti uma come lo. Mori be bomu butoke. Fodi. Blen loti gine babula gai. Ai la uda ya hunia. Japan pleni. Mua gamo kaloti. Kali abri ke guarda ke bai. Bom kakawai. Kibiri de gomene katele. Keri kakawai bom kakawai ke guarda tuala to. Otisa kasi guarda hol. Iki dia pana guarda hol. Tolo kali abri ke dia ban dulu ya ko kwau. Osele dulu.
Recognition and appreciation are two really important symbols that need to be conveyed to the wider world. And I think it's important to realise that these were people just like all of us. These were just young men and women who were trying to go about their lives and were thrust into this amazingly complex and difficult world that they had no control over. They had no say in the arrival of the war into this country. You hear quite often people who walk the Kokoda track talk about the fuzzy wuzzy angels, and they talk very respectfully, and they talk with a great deal of appreciation for the sacrifices that were made. But sometimes I think that we don't perhaps see them as just people who were ripped out of their existence and were put into this remarkable world where they performed absolutely nobly and wonderfully. And I hope that one outcome of this short film will be to spread that appreciation, not just here in Papua New Guinea, but elsewhere around the world.
This program was proudly brought to you by Capital Life Insurance, the Pacific's insurer, and PNG Tourism Promotion Authority.